Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you, joined by my co-host, Chad Oban. We're going to talk to a couple of U.S. House candidates today. But before we get to that, Chad, I wanted to ask you a really important question. Is your given name Chadwick?
It is not.
It is not.
It's Chad. I mean, if you want to call me Chadwick, go ahead, Rob.
I thought it would be great if you were Chadwick. I mean, that sounds like a country club name. You know, like Muffy, get the scrumpets ready. Chadwick's coming over.
Well, I mean, the name Chad sort of has that reputation. A couple months ago, maybe it was a year ago, I was ordering coffee and I got a vanilla latte. And the guy behind the counter said, "Hey, what's your name?" And I said, "Chad." And he said, "Of course it is. That's such a Chad drink." I was like, whoa, man, I'm feeling attacked.
I don't know. I know the kids call people Chad. I'd have to Google that. Am I being insulted? I don't know. Because I'm an old man now and I'm not hip with the lingo.
I think it's the male version of Karen,
is it?
Is my understanding. Yeah.
Oh, he was not complimenting you, sir.
No, he was not. No, he was calling me basic is what he was calling me.
Yeah, I guess. I hope it was reflected in his tip. All right, we're actually gonna. Cara Mund did not come on this program to listen to us two idiots kibitz like that. Cara, how are you?
Great, thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Here we are again, another U.S. House campaign. Tell us why you decided to get in, and I wanted somebody. I saw a comment somewhere. On one of the articles about you getting into the race. I think it was one of mine, but don't quote me on that. But the point is, why is she always getting in late? And I guess I wanted to hear that. Why not start earlier? I mean, most of the candidates in the House race, Charlotte Moore got in right at the last minute, although I don't know how much of a factor she's going to be in this race. But, the rest of them, even Alex Balaz, they've been around for weeks. You got in right at the deadline. Why wait so long to get in?
Well, I'm going to correct you first. Alex got in 10 days before I did. So it was not weeks, and he was the GOP nominee now, or endorsed candidate. So not necessarily.
I don't think that's true, because I actually wrote an article about him getting in the race, and it was more than a month ago.
I believe he came on your show and said it was March 31st. And I
but he'd been showing up. And anyway, regardless, yeah, I guess I'll take your word for it.
So we'll go back. Let's go back to 2022. So when I jumped into the race in 2022, I came in after the Dobbs decision. The Dobbs decision happened either right before the primary or right after the primary. It happened in June. And it was very clear that my reason for running was because I wanted to support women's health, women's reproductive rights. I talked over and over about it during the campaign. And part of it was because there was not a candidate in the House race who supported women's health care, both the Democrat and the Republican. And at the point, I could not go with a party. The primary was over, and so going as an independent was the only option. Now we fast forward to 2024, and the exact same issues that we were debating in 2022 are still up for grabs, right? So we have women's reproductive health care. We're talking still about the Farm Bill because nothing is getting done. So there's a lot of factors that went into this decision. Primarily, I was thinking about when I go to the primary and at the time, the 3 candidates, now it's a 5-candidate race, but the 3 candidates are extremely far right, in my opinion. And I could not imagine voting for one of them. And so I thought, again, we don't have an advocate for women's health care. And I am confident that there are Republicans in this state, because they would come up to me after the race, right? They would come up and they would whisper and they would say, "I'm a Republican, but I voted for you." And I'm like, why are you whispering? This is an issue. It's in North Dakota, we don't have a clinic that does elective procedures. It truly is women's reproductive health care. And to me, this is not a partisan issue, despite how much they want to make it one. And there are Republican women in the state, there's Republican men who want their daughters, their granddaughters, the future generations to have the same rights that they did. And so again, I could either have sat back and, just watched as these candidates now bring forth a federal ban, or I could get in the race myself and be that voice for the people that, like myself, did not feel represented, wouldn't know who to vote for, because in my opinion, all three candidates are pretty much the same. So at that point, you're just picking which talking head do you want.
Cara, I've talked to a lot of Democrats who have said, I voted for Cara 2 years ago. I'm disappointed that she's running as a Republican now. Tell me why you chose to run as a Republican, and what are the values that Republicans have that you share? We're talking about, unfortunately, I think you're right that the issue of abortion is so polarized, left versus right, that you're probably running a little bit uphill in the Republican primary with your position on abortion, which I support. But what are the things that you would say, this is why I'm a Republican?
So I worked for Senator Hoban. I had an option to work for a Democrat or a Republican. I worked there in 2016. I'm the only candidate who's actually worked in D.C., and this wasn't just a typical year. It was 2016 when DAPL was at the front of our minds. Rob, you would call in often to the office. I remember. This was a hotly contested issue. Calls were coming in hundreds, and we were fielding those. And so I have been there. I've been in that Republican office. I have advocated for North Dakotans. And so it shouldn't be a surprise. I had the option to go with a Republican and a Democrat, and I went Republican. I then stated in my campaign that I would caucus with the Republicans. Again, I was given an option. That was an option that was not favorable for Democrats. They, really wanted me as a pro-choice candidate to choose the Democrats. And I said over and over I would go with the Republicans. And then again, like I said, in 2022, I didn't have a choice. I had to go as an independent. And I have been vocal against some of the rules of the party. There are resolutions that were brought forward that I don't agree with. But there are crucial aspects such as limited government, right? If we're going to talk about, right to privacy and not being in those spaces, then you can't be bringing both state laws and now a federal ban on top of it that invades women's rights. So I've always been part of the party, whether or not you agree with it or not. And, I have the option now. I have now declared, I've made it very clear that I'm not leaving. And I'm sure they don't want me to run with them. But if there is 5 candidates in this race, and which there is, and I were to win in June, I would guarantee that the 2 candidates on the ballot are going to support women's health care. And if one of the other candidates of the 4 were to win, that would not be the case. And now you look, too, at voting trends, right? Donald Trump is likely to be on the ballot. It is very likely that the House candidate is going to be the Republican. And so this is my only chance to ensure that not only am I going to represent those Republican women and men that support women's health care, but that I can ensure that women's rights will be protected.
What about voters? And I understand. The abortion issue is a very important issue. Don't get me wrong. And I think that you're right. When I look at the national polling, I think most Americans want abortion to be legal. Now, where things get a little fuzzy is, do they want it to be legal or illegal after 15 weeks, after 24 weeks? That's where things get, I think, a little more complicated. But I think most Americans want at least a degree of legal access to abortion. So I think you're right. But what about people who are listening to this thinking, yeah, abortion's important, but I work in the oil fields and I don't want my job regulated away, or, I work on the railroad or I have these other priorities, or I'm really concerned about education policy, or I'm really concerned about Ukraine. Do you think abortion's a top issue that's going to put you over the top?
I think it's an issue that people really care about, because now it's not just abortion. We're looking at IVF. We're looking at other decisions that relied on this same precedent of the Supreme Court. And it's much more than that. And I talked about this in 2022, I think on your podcast, should we be politicizing the court? And it is the only branch of government that's not supposed to be politicized. And we're seeing now more than ever. So I also want to be cautious of the word abortion, because again, we don't have a clinic in North Dakota that does elective procedures. And for a woman that goes through a miscarriage, the medical term for a miscarriage is spontaneous abortion. If we have women in this state who have a non-viable pregnancy. We don't have a standard in place of what's the case law of whether or not we can take action. And I don't want to be, as someone who is of childbearing age and of a family that has difficulties for women getting pregnant, staying pregnant, I don't want to be in that hospital wanting to go through case law to know whether or not my health care is protected. And beyond that, it's not the government's business. And if we are going to be a party that truly believes in limited government, we can't then turn around and say, except in the case of women. You just can't.
What about people who have, where the economy or inflation or things are at the top of their list? Because when I look at the list of things, of the things that it's like border security, it's inflation, it's the economy. Abortion's not on that top. The polls I see, it's not at the top. So what do you say to those voters? Because so far we've heard a lot about abortion and really nothing about other issues.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about women's health care. So again, not abortion, because we don't have a clinic that does elective procedures. So it's women's health care. But I truly believe in law and order. I am the only candidate in this race who is not worshiping Trump, who's not bowing to Trump. So that also makes me very different. And so if you're looking at top issues of how I'm different than the other two candidates or other four candidates, that is the biggest one. I support women and I will not bow to Trump. On top of that, I support being energy independent. I support securing our borders. I don't think anyone is above the law. I truly do believe in law and order, and especially as an attorney and the only attorney in this race. I recognize, the threat that's happening to the Supreme Court, the politicization. I support Israel, and that was one of the GOPs that they voted on, National Committee, in the winter meeting. And they, voted for supporting Israel and the surrender of Hamas. I agree with all of that. But if you want to, those are all positions that the other candidates and I are going to be similar on, right? But if you're going to really distinguish me, if you're wondering, why do I vote for Cara Mund? It's to protect the rights of your daughters, your granddaughters, and it's also to ensure that our democracy is protected.
Cara, during the last campaign, you were somewhat critical of the GOP and how they failed to sort of elevate women into leadership roles. I would suggest this last GOP convention, where two qualified women, Julie Fedorchak and Kirsten Baszler, lost to complete unknown men at the convention, somewhat validates your point. Can you talk a little bit about, what you want to do in order to, raise up women's voices within the GOP? Because I do think that's an important thing that right now we might be slipping a little backwards on.
Yeah. You make a really great point, right? Two women who've been part of the party for a very long time, who are, Kirsten Baszler. She has a proven track record, and her opponent does not. And I support Kirsten Baszler. I'm like one of her biggest fans and supporters in education. So it shows that the issues I talked about in 2022 are still at the forefront. And it is incredible how many women we have running in this race. This is maybe one of the most amounts of women across governor, for senator, for House. This is what I was advocating for in 2022. So I think one of the big things is making sure we don't tear down necessarily the other women, which includes not writing a letter to the editor about any of the other women that says that, we're not going to recognize the sexism within the party. But it also, you can go after policy issues, right? But when another woman is calling out, for example, what had happened in the state legislature, you then can't turn around and say, oh, but you don't get to talk about it. And I think some of the biggest criticism I've received from the GOP is that I need to wait my turn in line. And I've heard this over and over. I need to wait my turn in line. And I don't know if that would necessarily be the case if I was a man, just to be honest. And I've seen what happens when you have to wait your turn in line. And again, you get bypassed at the convention.
I don't know that it's, one concern I have about you and frankly about Alex Balazs is neither of you have governed before. I can look at Rick Becker, and he has a governing track record in the legislature. I can look at votes he's cast. I can look at debates he's participated in. Julie Fedorchak has a lengthy track record of in public service, governing as an elected leader at the Public Service Commission, and then prior to that, serving in various administrations. You don't really have that. I know you have your internship with Senator Oban, but that's not exactly a a policy-making position. Is it that people are telling you to wait your turn? Or are they saying North Dakota has one member of the House of Representatives, and maybe we want to give that position to somebody with a track record? So it's not wait your turn. It's maybe don't start at the top.
Well, then why did Alex get the endorsement?
Well, that's not me. I'm not voting there. And I have the same criticism of Alex. I've said it before on this podcast. I have the same criticism of him. I like Alex. So far I think he's represented himself well. I just don't know much about him. He kind of came from out of nowhere. So I guess that's my thing for you is, why Congress? Why not start in the legislature or one of the statewide offices? And even if we look at previous members of Congress, Heidi Heitkamp was Attorney General prior to being elected senator. She was tax commissioner prior to being elected senator. Earl Pomeroy was also held, elected office prior to. Why not get experience at a lower level of office? And I would ask the same thing of Alex Balazs. I don't know him. This is the problem I have is we have one vote in the House of Representatives and you don't have a track record.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we have one vote, right? And you're a voice for everyone. You're not a voice just for the GOP. And so that's a crucial aspect. You look at the voting record of the two candidates who you say have track records. They are, yes, people, you know exactly how they're going to vote. They're not going to go across the aisle. And a lot of them, they're going to do as they're told, or they're going to join the Freedom Caucus. And, they're not going to negotiate on behalf of North Dakotans. To say that I have no experience, none of them have served in a national role where you are the head of a nonprofit organization, right? Like none of them have that experience. At 30 years old, I had done that. I've become a lawyer. I'm practicing, at one of the best firms in the country. I am so fortunate for all of that. And so to say that I don't have any experience, I have experience that is outside of just being a career politician, which is what a lot of people are drawn to. They want someone who's going to go in and negotiate. You want an advocate? Well, then pick the lawyer who does it for a living and who has to listen to both sides, who has to find the best argument and has to come to a negotiation and agreement.
Cara, speaking of working with both sides, the issue of the southern border security is a big one. And I'll be honest, as a Democrat, I've been somewhat frustrated that the Dems came to the table a little bit late on this thing. But there was a bill that moved forward through bipartisan negotiations that came to the floor. And then the former president essentially tanked it by putting pressure on members of the GOP caucuses because he wanted to keep the issue alive for the presidential campaign. How would you handle the border security? Do you think it's a big deal? And would you have voted for that bipartisan bill?
Yeah, I think it's a huge deal right now. And people are going to want to paint me as a one-issue candidate, but I fully support securing the border. Had that bill come before me, I would have voted for it. It is a bipartisan. We see so many members of the GOP campaigning on securing the border, and they had an opportunity to do it. And, I agree with the senator from Oklahoma that said, when we have a Democrat in president or a Democrat as president, and Republicans are finally getting a bill that's going to allow them to secure the border, and now we're going to just walk away. You have to have give and take. And this was an incredible opportunity to protect our national security, to protect our country, to secure that border. And they used it as an opportunity to politicize it. And again, who gets the credit? So I completely disagree with what had happened. I would have supported it. And I do think we need to do more to secure the border.
Cara, you mentioned working as an attorney. One thing that when you got in the race, immediately people started messaging me a profile it's from a website of a law firm based in New York City, and it listed you as an attorney there, based in New York City. Have you been working in New York City since you last ran? When did you move back to North Dakota?
Yeah, I've been in North Dakota since I ran. So I work for the only firm that allows me to work fully remote, and so I chose that job to stay in North Dakota. And so many people have said, after my 2022 race, oh, she's just going to leave the state. She's going to go do something else. And no, I've been dedicated to North Dakota. I want to stay here. I've said this over and over. I want to raise my children here. This is the place that I want to be. And I was able to make my career work with my passion of being part of North Dakota's community and part of our state.
Yeah, and I would just say, I know other attorneys who work for national firms that are based in North Dakota. So I think that's probably a concept that
people were missing it. I just wanted to get into it.
No, I think it's a good question, but just so listeners know, this isn't a super unique situation. that's happening.
Everybody thinks I live in Fargo, even though I work from home in the Magic City.
In the Magic City. Cara, you said you're not a Trump worshiper. What does that mean with a party that's overwhelmingly supporting Trump? Did you vote for Trump in the past 2 elections? How are you handling this coming up election? How are you handling Trump, who seems to be running for governor in North Dakota, seems to be running for Congress in North Dakota? Biden seems to be running for both of those offices as well. But presidential politics is a tough nut to crack unless you're all in for Trump. How are you handling that? Where are you at?
Yeah. I will say I'm appalled of how much people have caved, have changed their opinions, will support him just to advance their personal agenda. We're seeing it across the state, just as you said. He's currently in a trial right now as we speak. And there were incredible GOP candidates that were going for presidential. And the fact that they were kind of dismissed is discouraging. The fact that, there was a debate, I think last week, that I was not invited to. And I would be very curious to tally how many times they talked about Trump and how great Trump and blah, blah, blah. The reality is I'm part of the GOP. So if he becomes president, which is very possible, I will have to work with him. But that does not mean that I need to worship him. And that is the big difference. As a member of Congress, you should be critical of the executive branch, even if they are part of your party, right? There's 3 different branches of government for a reason. And I am concerned, especially as you said, with the border. I mean, he can call in and then all of a sudden everyone's going to change their opinion. And how does this advance us for the election? And how can this support him? And I mean, again, at the end of the day, the people who hurt the most are Americans. We have inflation that is through the roof. We have all of these issues and there's so much infighting. And I think he is very much a driver of it. As an attorney, I believe you're innocent till proven guilty, but there has been a conviction against him for rape. I mean, there is just clear indications. He is a leader that has had his own cabinet, his own vice president come out and say, do not pick him. He is not fit for office. I mean, it is concerning. So, I mean, I will work with him. And that's how you're going to be the best advocate, the best member of the House. But at the same time, it does no benefit to North Dakotans to just worship him.
I appalled accurately describes my feeling about Trump. As if people couldn't tell, I get accused of writing about it too often, but it appalls me as well. I will say you said that Trump was convicted of rape. That's not quite. I'm not defending him. He was found civilly liable for rape. I want to be absolutely clear. That's an important distinction.
Yes,
a distinction as a practical matter in politics without much difference, but it is what it is. I wanted to ask though, I mean, barring some extreme turn of events, it's going to be Trump, the Republican, versus Biden, the Democrat, on the ballot in 2020 in November. Or which of those, if either, are you voting for?
Yeah, I'm probably I'm considering the options for both, right? And also, like I said, he's in court right now. Will he be an eligible candidate? Who knows, right? And a lot can happen between now and November. And I think one of the crucial aspects, we saw this in the House race. A lot of people came out with their endorsements before all the names were even on the ballot. So again, there's a lot that I'm going to be evaluating. I'm not going to rule out what had happened in his last presidency. I'm not going to rule out what happened on January 6th. Those are all things that I'm factoring in when I'm making my decision. But I will say in 2016, when I was working in D.C. for Senator Hoban, I did vote for Trump. And I think one of the best parts is then you can reevaluate, right? In 2022, you can reevaluate now this year in 2024. So you don't have to be solely with that one candidate the whole time. And while I, again, support the GOP, there are just a lot of concerns, especially when his own cabinet members are coming forward saying he is not fit for office. And I don't think he is above the law, which makes me the only candidate in this race who sees him as equal. He does not get any type of privilege because he was president, and he should not be worshipped.
I wish we didn't have to talk about Trump so much, but I mean, it's just unfortunate that he is unavoidable in Republican politics, or really politics in general. But I just want to say, I mean, you're simultaneously saying that you're appalled by Trump, but you're still considering voting for him?
I don't want to rule anything out until we get to November. Again, like, what happens if he is convicted in this trial? We need to see what happens. But I will not, you're not going to hear me in a debate be one of those people who continuously talks about how great he is. I don't think he's a good person. I think he creates a lot of division. And that's something that makes me very different than the other candidates.
Cara, in this morning's Fargo Forum, Tony Bender wrote a column that basically suggested that the best option for independents and people left of center were a general election where it's you and Trygve Hammer as the two different options. Are you openly encouraging Democrats to vote in the Republican primary or encouraging people to cross over to sort of set up that scenario that you laid out earlier? I mean, do you agree with Tony Bender that this is a good move for people who care about women's health care and those kind of things, who maybe don't traditionally vote in the Republican primary, to come over and vote for you on the Republican side?
Yeah, I'm encouraging them to look at the stats and the possibility of what's going to happen, right? Like, Trump could become president. It is very likely, based on who's held the seat before, it's going to be the Republican nominee. So you can either have someone who wants a federal abortion ban. You can have someone who doesn't want vaccines that have been around for decades. You could have someone who's just going to bow to Trump and do whatever Trump says to advance their own political agenda and their own career prospects. Or you could have someone who, as Rob, you've said, right, an outsider who comes in, who's not afraid to call it out for what it is, who supports women's rights, who wants to ensure that democracy is protected, that wants to advocate for securing the border, advocate for our farmers in the Farm Bill. I mean, someone who's willing to reach across the aisle. And, we know that the margin is going to be very small. It's likely, right? When this next Congress comes in, it is going to be a small margin. So if North Dakota is represented by a far right voice, our voice really isn't going to matter. We're going to know exactly how they're voting. It's the person who's in the middle, the person who can negotiate across both sides, that's going to be able to get stuff done, and who's going to have, more than just be one member of that 435. They are going to have an influence. And so it's up to Democrats. If you evaluate the situation, you look at the possibility of winning, you look at, what precedent has showed before, who's on the ballot for the general, for president. And it's up to them at that point. But again, if your issues are democracy and women's health care, there is an opportunity here that both candidates will be supporting that.
Cara, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and just finished up our interview with Cara Mund, and now we're going to move on to another candidate for the United States House, Public Service Commissioner Julie Fedorchak. Julie, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Rob. Good to see you and talk with you, Chad.
I could just imagine you sitting around a couple of months ago planning for this 5-way race that we have now. It's all unfolding exactly how you envisioned it, right?
Oh, exactly. That's the thing about politics. You can never predict how things are going to go. So that's what you get prepared for when you throw your name in the ring like this.
So tell me, we're in this race. You're running against Rick Becker. You're running against Cara Mund. We just got some fundraising numbers out. You did pretty good. You were the top fundraiser overall, if we don't count Rick Becker's loans to his own campaign. In terms of actually raising money from groups and that, you did pretty well. Tell us about it. I know you've got a new campaign ad. You're going up on television. What's the strategy look like as we head now into June?
Well, we're really excited. We have a lot of great momentum, we feel, coming through the first phase of the campaign. In 45 days, we've raised $450,000. And we got our entire campaign set up in that time frame, too. getting our teammates, getting Sean Cleary as our campaign manager, working through all of that and raising that money. So we're excited because we feel like we have the structure in place now. We have a good start on the fundraising, and we have great momentum moving forward for the next 8 weeks of the campaign. And that phase really is about continuing the fundraising. So if anyone wants to support my campaign, Julie4nd.com is where you'd go to do that. But the second piece, most importantly, is the messaging and getting our message out on television and through one-on-one interaction with the voters, which is something that I love the most about the campaigns. I love the grassroots stuff. I'm really excited to hit the ground running throughout the state and really meeting people one-on-one and talking about what they are concerned about, which we know is, basically inflation is crushing them. They're very concerned about the borders and what's happening down on the southern borders and its impact on our entire country. And they're concerned about the debt. And those are all things that I'm that's why I'm running. I'm concerned about those same things. I'm concerned about it as a mom with kids. I look at the future and I think we've got to turn things around in this country. We have to get things back on track. And I believe I'm the only person in this race who has the record of A, never changing parties, and B, working consistently for North Dakotans in North Dakotans and delivering results, delivering good government. That's what I am all about. And I'm very excited to take what I know and have learned and my experience in the state level and apply it in Washington.
Hey, Julie, I'm sure you are probably sick of talking about the convention, but I'm going to ask you about the convention anyway. Obviously it ended up being a bit of a disaster. I don't want to say it, but it didn't end up the way I think any of the candidates would have liked. Obviously, you have a special place in your heart for the convention and the convention process. But going back and thinking back, would you have skipped the convention to avoid that sort of Becker sort of throwing chaos into the thing? Do you think it was a mistake for you to go to the convention?
Absolutely not. I would go back to that convention and I would probably do it the exact same way. I feel like we gained a lot at that convention. We touched a ton of voters. We were a positive force at that convention. We brought a lot of energy and enthusiasm. And just because not everybody received it well doesn't mean that it wasn't the right thing to do. So we couldn't have prepared for Rick's gamesmanship. That kind of politicking is not, in my opinion, what people want, what North Dakotans want. It came off as being very self-serving. The only person that benefited from him keeping 1,500 people there to cast ballots, some of them, a third of them in his favor, the only person that benefited from that was him. Everybody else had more of their time taken away from them when they were already behind schedule for the convention. So I think that we came out of that convention with great momentum. We couldn't have predicted it, but it was not, it was just the way it all came together. I felt comfortable saying, you know what, this is not what this is all about. We're gonna call it now and take our case to the people directly at the primary and save people the time and hassles of an ongoing battle when you've got folks like Becker and his people who were just unwilling to be productive. So I thought the convention was a great success for us, despite us not ultimately walking away with the endorsement.
Julie, I want to talk about the abortion issue for a moment. When we first had you on the show, right after you announced that you were getting into the House race, we asked you about a federal abortion ban, and you seemed to indicate to us at the time that you didn't support one. You came out not that long ago before the convention saying you do support a federal abortion ban. Can you explain? I mean, did your position evolve? Did we not understand you the first time we asked you about it? And why? So, I mean, for so long, I always heard, and I still believe, I don't support a federal abortion ban. I still believe the argument that conservatives made against Roe for a long time, that it's a states' rights issue. I still think it's a states' rights issue. I think the federal government had a butt out. So Explain that. Did you evolve on this? Why are you supporting a federal abortion ban?
Thank you for that question, Rob. So I support what Roe v. Wade. I support the Dobbs decision, and it's sending the power back to the states, and the states controlling the decision ultimately on abortion. However, and then secondly, I think we all need to spend a heck of a lot more time working to eliminate the need for abortion and supporting women who are in unexpected pregnancies and helping them choose life. I think that's where the bulk of our time and attention should be spent. What's evolved for me is that when we first talked, I don't want any federal action to take away from the state's ability to have a stricter abortion law than what a federal law would be. And so, but my position is that if we could get to a position federally where we supported, say, like a post 16 weeks or post 20 weeks ban on abortion nationally, I would support that.
So 2 follow-ups. One, we all know, everybody who's on this call and most of the people listening, that pregnancy doesn't always go as planned. So if you're a parent and you're 5 months and you get the news that you're the child isn't going to make it, and you need to make a decision, and these are real life situations of harm to the mother, the pain to the baby that's being born. I just want to make it clear that I understand that your opinion is that Congress is in a better position to make that determination than the mother, the parent, the doctor, their God, their clergy. So a congressman from New York or Alabama is in a better position to make that decision than that mother who's going through this traumatic thing.
Well, so Chad, I do believe in exceptions for the life of the mother. Obviously, rape, incest, and life of the mother exceptions, I support those. So the life of the mother is, I think, what you're talking about. And I think
I'm not talking about life. I'm not talking about a mom dying. I'm talking about mom going through a lot of pain and agony, and the emotional toll that would go on having to take a child to full term that is not going to make it. But I just want to make it clear, you think Congress is in a better position to make that determination than the mother, the father, the doctor, and their God.
So as a mom, I'll tell you, I am pro-life. I think that there is nothing like bringing a child into this world. Then there's nothing that compares to that, planned or unplanned. Obviously, there are concerns that evolve in pregnancy, but I think as a country, we need to be taking a strong position in support of life. It's a moral issue, and it's very difficult to legislate nationally for each and every little or big exception. But I think as a whole, I support a strong position for our country for life. And I think, Chad, I think a majority of Americans also support that in something between the 16 and 20 week time period, agreeing as a nation that we are going to protect life at that level. It would be very consistent with many other countries in the world. Most countries in the world support that. So I just don't think that's real controversial.
Well, I would just say, you're saying on one hand, it's very difficult to legislate nationally while advocating to legislate nationally. And the other part of that is you're for state rights as long as the states agree with your position at a national level. I'm
for states' rights to decide, but beyond a certain level, beyond a certain floor. But I do think that a national floor, when it comes to life, is a reasonable place to go. Are we there right now? Are we ready for that in our country today? I don't think we are. But that, I think, is a worthwhile and a worthy goal long term to get there. And I don't, would this be my goal first, in the first 100 days in Congress? It wouldn't, but I'm looking long term. Like, I think as we evolve, as we work through this really difficult issue nationally, I'm really comfortable that we have the states work this out. But long term, getting to a national place, peace of mind where we're at 16 weeks or 20 weeks or whatever that might be, I think that's a worthy goal, and I would support that as a congressperson from North Dakota.
Well, right now we're looking at a House Republican caucus in Washington, D.C. that is divided against itself. In fact, we have the very real possibility of seeing another speaker removed, something that prior to last year had never happened before in the House of Representatives. Now it may happen twice. That's a lot of dysfunction. I mean, do you, and I know it's hard to ask you, you're not a part of that caucus yet. I mean, if you get elected, you'll be part of the caucus of the next Congress. But, I mean, do you support Speaker Johnson right now? Can you give us some insight on how you feel watching that unplay as somebody who may be participating in it next year?
I feel like this is exactly the type of politicking that citizens are super frustrated with. And the more time we spend going back and forth on leaders, et cetera, the less time we're spending on the real issues that concern our citizens and are a threat to our country. So whatever I could do as a member of Congress to provide stability and common sense and reason in these kinds of debates, that's where I will be. I support Speaker Johnson. I think he's done a pretty good job of trying to balance all of the different factions of the party and President Trump. And I would work to support stable leadership in the House so that we can actually get to the people's business.
Julie, one of the things that you mentioned that people are concerned about is concern with the national debt. It seems like that's one of those issues that candidates talk about all the time. And then it doesn't matter if it's President Trump or President Biden or President Obama, the debt continues to go up. I mean, we all remember Kent Conrad saying, if the debt doesn't go down, I'm not going to run again. So what can you do as one of 435 to sort of work on that issue, to sort of make sure the country is living within its means moving forward?
That is something that I really look forward to. And again, taking my same kind of approach to problem solving that I've used in my job at the Public Service Commission and throughout my tenure in business and government. So you have to get on the right committees, right, to have the biggest effect. But I would be a voice for, let's have a budget. Let's get a budget for starters, and work through the budget process that does exist, and really push through that. I think that's a big piece of it. And then the second piece is I think we've got to work on the entitlements. I mean, that's 70% of the budget right there. And I know that's controversial. And I know that it's not easy, but when Ken Conrad started talking about the budget, I remember him doing that. I remember his big charts, his big posters that he had. And he talked a lot about Social Security being insolvent in like 2035 or 2033. And here we are 10 years from that time period, and we're still haven't made any progress on it. So I would work hard to get others in in my caucus to get serious about making the changes needed on some of those big issues to get the budget back on track. That's just the hard work that needs to be done. And at some point, you have to put aside your own popularity in your political career and work hard on some of those issues. And that's why I'm going there.
What you just said there a minute ago, get serious, I think is really interesting, because I'm looking. I wanted to ask you a question about what I perceive is one of your weaknesses as a candidate, and I say that not so much as a criticism, because it's one of the things I like about your candidacy. But I think one of the realities of politics in America right now is there is a not small percentage of voters that like very performative, very bombastic politicians. And you are not those things. And I really appreciate that about you, because I see you as somebody who is serious. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you go and be effective in an environment where it seems like the people who have the most juice right now are members of the House Republican caucus and frankly, the Democratic caucus, who are bomb throwers? It seems like they have the power. They're the ones who can make the headlines and stir people up and everything. How do you combat that as somebody who says, listen, we have to be serious. We have to be sober-minded about this stuff?
Well, this is where I think there's a clear contrast between me and one of my opponents in particular, Rick Becker, because he is of that ilk where he likes to throw bombs and make headlines. I want to roll up my sleeves and get to work. And I think that there are others out there who are like me. I think there's a decent number of them, in fact, serious legislators who want to get to work and solve these problems. I also have a communications background, so I think I can combine that, and we'll have to be very intentional about doing that in terms of here's what I'm working on and communicating that to the people of the state and in a regular way, and hopefully helping them understand that this isn't an overnight. These problems didn't happen overnight, and they're not going to be solved overnight. We're going to need resolve, and we're going to need commitment. And we're going to need to be somewhat patient. But I mean, that's just the reality of the situation we're in, and I will take to the airwaves as much as I can and need to tell that story, but also in a pragmatic way. And at some point, voters in this country are going to have to make a decision too on who they want. And I'll make the case.
Julie, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was you haven't changed parties. That's very true, but could you elaborate a little bit? I think that was a reference to probably both Becker and Mund. And I know it's something that came up at the debate, but can you talk a little bit about, you've been a Republican your whole life. Becker has ran as an independent, a libertarian. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
For sure. Again, it's a clear contrast with me and both Becker and Cara. And that is, they have changed parties as an opportunist, when they saw an opportunity to possibly get elected under a different party. That really, in my mind, undermines your principles. Like, what are your principles and how are you going to work to deliver them? And when you're elected, I've been called by Becker a rhino Republican in name only, and I believe he is the rhino. He's the Republican in name only when it's expedient for him. He started as a libertarian, then he changed to become a Republican, and then he changed to become an independent, and now he's back to being a Republican. So I was born into a very conservative family. I was raised with conservative values. I live those things myself. I write on the back of sticky notes. I recycle. I just, this is how I am. You talk to my friends and I wear my daughter's hand-me-down clothes. I'm conservative to the core. And that's how I believe government functions best. And I have tried very hard in my service at the Public Service Commission to live those same values and to deliver on those and a lot of things people will never see how we've done that in the Public Service Commission. But, time and again, whether it's on how I approach the rate increases from the utility companies and trying to save our ratepayers money, and the fact that North Dakotans have 40% lower utility rates than the national average, that's a result of conservative leadership. The fact that I've pushed back on Obama and Biden when they want to shut down the Dakota Access, I know how important that is. I know how important regulatory certainty is for our industries. That's conservative values in action, working to get natural gas extended to unserved communities in North Dakota, one by one by one. Not big, flashy headlines, but that's conservative values in action that matter to the citizens of this state. I've spent my life doing that, and I have learned a lot of skills along the way, have proven leadership qualities, and I'm ready to take that same experience and commitment to Washington on behalf of our state. And I think by and large, by far, I am the proven candidate in this field that can deliver on those things for North Dakotans.
Right before we began this interview with you, we interviewed Cara Mund, and one of the things she said is that she's the only candidate in this race who's not going to worship Donald Trump. She said, if he becomes president, I will have to work with him. I will not worship him. Now, to be fair, she also wouldn't rule out necessarily voting for him in 2024. She said she voted for him in 2016. But that's sort of her accusation to, the other four candidates in this race. She said she listened to the debate between you and Rick Becker and Alex Balazs recently, and she said all three of you are Trump worshipers, and she's not. Respond to that. What's your relationship with the former president if he is indeed going to be elected again? What would your relationship with him be like?
Well, I'll start out by saying the only person I worship is my God, and so I don't worship anybody else but that. I will support Donald Trump, and I will look forward to doing that because Donald Trump was good for North Dakota, and his American First energy and ag policy is good for our country, and it's vital for our state. And I really very much look forward to working with a president like Donald Trump who understands the importance of energy to our country and to our national security, our economy, and even international policy. So, Donald, the EPA is just running amok. I think the state is in 24 different lawsuits with federal agencies. I expect any day now the EPA to come out with greenhouse gas rules that are pretty devastating to states like North Dakota, and quite honestly, very threatening to our electric grid nationally. I have been outspoken both in-state and nationally on this issue. The EPA's rules that they propose would be devastating to the ability of our national organizations, the national grid monitors, to maintain our grid in a reliable and affordable way. It would threaten to shut down 110 gigawatts. That's like the entire MISO, the entire load in the 15-state region of this country during Storm Uri. Threatens to shut down that much coal-fired power, coal and gas-fired power in this country. It's at a pace that is just not sustainable or feasible. It's completely disconnected to reality, and it's a threat to our country. So the EPA and other federal agencies need to be reined in when it comes to our energy policy, and Donald Trump will do that. And so that is one issue that I very much look forward to working with him on. And our ag community is the next industry that has a bullseye for entities on the left. And so we really have to stand strong on those in those vital areas that are really important to our state and also vital to our country as a whole. And North Dakota has incredible opportunities to lead and provide solutions on the energy front for our country. We have every resource under the sun, from coal and natural gas, oil, wind. We could be a nuclear leader moving in the future. We can do hydrogen. I mean, we just have an incredible bounty of resources that we need to unleash for our country. And I look forward to having a leader like President Trump who will work hand in hand with us to do that.
Julie, the flip side, of course, of Donald Trump is the issues around some of his morals. And you obviously live by high moral standards. Here's a guy who's, in court for a variety of different things, been civilly found liable of rape, has slept with a porn star, is quoted as saying, grab women by their genitals. And then that's before we even get to January 6th. So I understand all the policy positions, but how do you balance that with sort of your high moral expectations? Because I don't know how anybody could say that he has high morals when it comes to his personal life. But as you're sort of figuring this out, how to support Trump or not support Trump, how do you balance a policy agreement with him being a person that most people wouldn't want their kids to grow up to act like?
So I'm not going to pass judgment on Trump on his personal issues. But I definitely will talk about his political issues all day long. I do think that he'll have his day in court, and those issues will be settled in that arena. I am concerned that there seems to be a two-tier justice system in our country, where the whole federal Justice Department has been kind of weaponized against Trump. And so, that's concerning. But like I said, I think I'm focused on the issues at hand that matter to North Dakota. And that's where I'm going to spend my time as it relates to judgment on our national leaders. And well, I'm just going to leave it at that. I think Trump has just really the qualities that we need in terms of standing firm for the border, trying to get our energy sector back up and running, agriculture, our economy, and inflation and debt. So I think he's the right leader at the right time.
Julie, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, you guys. Just in time, my voice is about shot.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, just finished up our interviews with Julie Fedorchak and Cara Mund. And Chad, I got to tell you, the one thing I took out of both of those interviews, and by the way, I've got both of these candidates in the race. I mean, they're offering a very, very divergent approach to Republican politics. But really just how completely dominant Trump is in Republican politics, because you just heard Julie Fedorchak, who to your question, is a woman of faith. I think you're right. I think she holds herself to a very high moral standard. And her unwillingness to hold Donald Trump to that same standard, or at least even speak to it, I think speaks volumes. And then Cara Mund, who says, she called Trump, I wrote it down here. I don't want to misquote her. I think she called him an awful person.
Yeah,
she called him, and she said she's appalled. She's not going to worship him, but won't rule out voting for him.
Yeah, it is shocking. It is shocking the power that this guy has, and I often wonder. I
want to fix my quote. She said, "I don't think he's a good person." I don't think she used the word awful. Sorry.
But don't you think most people would agree with that statement, that he's not a good person? Even people who like him. Julie didn't offer up a lot of justifying his behavior. She avoided that pretty good.
She said, the only person I worship is my God. I'm not going to pass judgment on Trump and his personal issues, which, I mean, okay, but I don't know. I feel like character matters in who we choose to lead the country.
And it used to it. And maybe, and you sort of got to this during the thing, but if you're thinking you're a coal worker in Western North Dakota and you think, maybe you don't like Trump's behavior, but your job might be gone, which, by the way, I don't believe will happen under the Biden administration. But if that's your thought process, it's hard to get to character matters if you're trying to figure out how to feed your family.
And it really does. I guess that's why I understand the calculation a lot of people are making, but I mean, it is remarkable. I expected Cara, after all the stuff that she was saying about Trump, I was expecting when I asked her the question, well, who are you going to vote for in 2024? And I don't think she has to say Biden. She could pick a third party candidate, or she could do like I'm going to do. I'm just not going to vote for I'm none of the above. They have to earn my vote, and none of them have. So, I don't. It's just remarkable to me. Like everybody, and believe me, I know how much of a third rail it is because I take it on the chin every day. I could read you 5 emails that have collected in my inbox right now from Trump supporters who are upset about something I wrote about Trump that have arrived since we started recording this podcast.
And it's really interesting. As I was thinking about these interviews, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to try to stay away from Trump. But it's impossible to stay away from Trump. And, and I've been critical of both governors' candidates for talking so much about Trump and Biden. I think, Julie's talking about Biden. I mean, she's running for a federal office. This makes sense for her to sort of engage on the federal stuff. I did like the idea of, no matter who the president is, we want a member of Congress who can work with either party. That's an important thing as only having one voice in Congress. If Trump's not the president, it would be really nice if we had somebody who could work with the administration. So anyway, it was really interesting because they have such divergent sort of perspectives on what they want the Republican Party to be. And
by the way, I think both of those candidates would be very capable of reaching across the aisle. I think Julie's shown it in her work with the PSC, which often includes, work very closely with. I'm sure we could come up with Democratic lawmakers who would talk about having a good working relationship with Julie Fedorchak. So I don't think there's any problem there. The problem is I think whether it's Julie Fedorchak or Cara Mund or Tammy Miller or Kelly Armstrong or any of these Republicans, I think they're just all afraid to express their true feelings about Donald Trump.
Yeah, the real question becomes the day after the primary. Does the messaging change a little bit with nominees? Are they able to sort of take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm just not going to talk about this guy anymore? Because that's the other option, right? I think a lot of these folks, if they weren't on the ballot with Trump sort of hanging over the party, they just simply would not talk about the former president.
Yeah. I think with Cara, I think she does need to sharpen up her policy messaging outside of I realize she's passionate about it, and I'm not going to take that away from her. I don't see abortion being a winning issue for her in a Republican primary. I think that's going to be very, very tough.
It does become, we've talked about it before. In 2016, there's only 115,000 people that voted. If Cara could get 20,000 Democrats to come over and change that denominator, I don't know, right? It certainly becomes interesting. Are there 10% of Republicans who are pro-choice, who are sick of this Trump stuff, that would vote for 15%? All of a sudden the math gets goofy. I just don't know how that works. And I've talked to people about, Democrats crossing. Frankly, if Democrats want to influence this election, the most important thing they could do is vote in the primary on the Republican side, not just for Congress, but also in these legislative races where there's complete, far right folks running against normal Republicans.
I think the problem is for something like that to happen, and it did happen in 2016 for Doug Burgum. I think part of it, I think Cara's got some things working against her.
There's Democrats that are mad at her still from 2022
over the Mark Haugen thing. I think there's Democrats who are going to hear that she's not ruling out voting for Donald Trump, and they're going to think that sounds After all the, I mean, her messaging right now on Trump sounds a little disingenuous. I don't see how you could say he's not a good person, but I might vote for him. Like, ugh.
But I think your point about Trump, and even with all the Trumpy advertising from all the candidates, I think that makes it less likely that Democrats cross over. I think we're going to have a higher turnout overall. But I've talked to Democrats who I've said, you should vote in the Republican primary because this, and this. And they're like, I'm not voting the Republican primary. All these guys are Trump lovers. I'm not voting for anybody who loves Trump.
And I think Democrats also have some, even though Katrina's running unopposed, Katrina Christensen, the Senate candidate, she's running unopposed. Trigvy's not. He does have Roland Reimers is running against him, although that's not much of a challenge. But my point is they're both compelling candidates.
Right.
Katrina and Trigvi have both really upped their game from when they were on the ballot 2 years ago. They're raising, I wrote about this week, they're raising decent money, for Democratic. I mean, Trigvi Hammer is ahead of where Max Schneider was at this point in the 2018 cycle. Well, I mean, like double. So there's a reason for them to stay home on their own ticket too.
Right. And I think I mentioned this, Trigvi and Katrina, even at the Democrat convention, they look like candidates. They're not,
and not to be insulting. I mean, listen, it takes a lot of courage to put your name on a statewide ballot.
Oh,
I'm not,
yes.
But like a Zach Racknerud or some of the other candidates the Democrats have been running have not really been very serious candidates.
These are both serious, qualified candidates. Yes. The other thing that I've been hearing some rumors that it was folks associated with the far right that got Roland Reimers to collect the signatures because they wanted to limit the amount of people who were crossing over. So they want Democrats to stay home.
It was some of the same people. I would argue it was the same people who circulated the petitions for Charlotte Moore, who's the Williston woman who got on the ballot at the last minute. They also circulated petitions for Roland Reimers. And I think it's more of the same sort of manipulation that we saw at the NDGOP convention, where they're trying to win through hijinks instead of making a case and building a coalition of support.
It's so cynical.
Yeah.
Like the idea that they got this woman from Williston on because they wanted another woman's name on the ballot because somehow the voters are so dumb that they're not going to remember that.
Which is insulting to I think the women, like a woman's going to look at the ballot and just see a woman's name and say, "Oh, I'll vote for her." I don't know.
She's got the same parts as I do, so therefore I'm going to vote for her. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I think this idea
don't get me wrong. I have a low opinion. I just want to go on the record and reiterate my position that I have a low opinion of the intelligence or the engagement of a lot of voters, but that has nothing to do with gender.
So, Rob, so you say you get hate mail sometimes. Huh? That's surprising with those kind of positions. That's shocking. But I think the Reimers thing is also so cynical. I mean, if it's Becker and those kind of people who are getting him on the ballot to make sure Democrats stay home or somehow, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's time that we look at voter registration and that, I know it's a third rail in North Dakota politics, but if Republicans are choosing the Republican candidate, maybe people like I shouldn't be able to vote in their primary.
I think there's something to that. And I mean, listen, I think we like a lot of our quaint traditions in North Dakota. We have a process that is so wide open that it's being taken advantage of, unfortunately. And I don't want to lose a lot of that openness, but I think you may have a point. We got to stop there, though. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. Coming up on Friday, we're going to have Senator Kevin Cramer on, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I think next week we're going to look on maybe getting Trigvi and Katrina on the show, which if they're listening is probably surprised. Like, he hasn't reached out to us yet. I'm going to do it. I'm going to reach out. We're going to get him on. And we'll see about getting Rick Becker. And we've had Alex on. But we're going to work on all that. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again. Inform Communications Company has a robust podcast library. At inform.com/podcast. We have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inform.com/podcast and explore them all today.